Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Chelsea Wolfe, titled Abyss. You know, it's weird, I think I'm simultaneously growing out of and growing into gothic music. Because like most teenagers, listened to a lot of metal and later went on to listen to Sisters of Mercy, Bauhaus, Depeche Mode, and The Cure, I've got more than a passing familiarity with the bleak, hollow-eyed chill and most gothic-flavored art. And while I never really went through an angry white boy phase, I found the appropriation of religious and horror iconography, the icy darkness of the tone, the obsession with death, and the provocative sexuality kind of fascinating. I really like the aesthetic. But as I got older, a lot of the glamorous side of goth culture just lost its appeal to me. Not entirely, to be sure, but the more adolescent whinging that focused on brooding darkness internally for its own sake just got tired. And you should all know by now how I feel about nihilistic art that just can't innovate on the premise. Kinda gets boring after a while, to be honest. But at the same time, the gothic material that aimed a little bit higher for something more primordial and existential, a little bit more high concept, that added more texture to the tragic stories and that added the ugliness of humanity to the mix. Now that's more fascinating to me. So the reasons I've always liked, say, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds or Kate Bush, for instance, they have that dark gothic element, but there's a humanity to make those stories all the more relatable. But what about an act like Chelsea Wolfe, an LA singer-songwriter who began her career in lo-fi folk that added sludgy and brittle riffs and drone-saturated soundscapes to create a particularly bleak brand of music that showed up in the haunting, the grime, and the glow, and the slightly cleaner but no less creepy and outright excellent album Apocalypsis. Her 2013 album Pain is Beauty cleaned things up even further, added more strings and operatic instrumentation, but while the improvements in writing, melody, and the Swans-esque crescendos definitely stood out, and I really liked that album, it also left me wishing that more of the grime, the darkness, that sour edge could really come back and add that creepy layer again. As such, you can bet I was looking forward to her newest album, Abyss, which reportedly was diving deeper into the howling, doom metal-inspired nightmare that always kind of lurked around the corner in her music. So I checked it out. What do we get? Well, it's kind of tricky to say. Mostly because Abyss is a very different sort of listening experience than previous Chelsea Wolfe albums. I recall Swans more and more, as the elegance appears all the more fragmented and primordial. The haunted gothic glamour is breaking apart at the seams. This is more analogous to being dragged into the eternal depths of Hades and abandoned to find your way out, if you even can. Or perhaps just a nightmare that cannot be penetrated no matter how much you want lucidity or some form of sanctuary from your own subconscious. More likely it's somewhere in between, but either way, it's a long, harrowing listen of an album that dives deep into that inky blackness. And while I'm not quite sure it's better than Apocalypsis, in fact I'm quite sure it's not, it definitely is a potent experiment, and shows that Chelsea Wolfe can capture her unique tone with different producers, instrumentation, and themes, and still make something of real quality. So while it's not quite a great album, it's definitely a good one. And the best place to start with all this would be the production and instrumentation, for sure. Where albums like Apocalypsis emphasize the spacious mix by manipulating negative space to create a hollowed out shell, Abyss is a denser experience, the sort of emptiness that fills itself with unearthly textures and sounds that lead to songs that feel bigger and more immediately intimidating. While you might not know what was in the darkness on previous Chelsea Wolfe records, the bleak danger on Abyss is palpable, even if its nature is less defined. More of this is courtesy of the doom metal elements that finally make a full appearance in the crushing, achingly slow grooves and the walls of distortion that erupt across this album. And with the rougher sound, the Swans comparison grows all the more striking. Along with the lengthy songs that initially felt long, I really do have enough instrumental ideas to justify their length. Mostly. I do feel that a couple of the outros run long, especially the ragged strings on the title track, and it's hard to deny that the droning intensity of these songs can make for an exhausting listen, but then again, that's entirely the thematic and instrumental point, and I wholeheartedly expect those who are more into doom metal or drone metal will find this record easy enough to take in. And there are definitely some instrumental moments that really stand out for me. The bell tolls against the clipped, agonized squeals on Dragged Out that later return on After the Fall against these oily keyboard sections, the strings that are chilling as hell on Gray Days, especially against that grimy beat and sinister bass, the funereal tone of Simple Death against the creaking crescendos, and especially that acoustic groove on Survive that conveys some really palpable menace. Hell, even though I didn't love the outro on that song, the plinking, eerie pianos on the title track are so palpable in creating that atmosphere of teetering on the edge of falling, it's legitimately terrifying. Honestly, for as much as the distortion and crunch does lend this album some heaviness and real density, I often find myself going back to the more sparse moments, the more quiet spots, to decide the lack of a more acoustic edge or crackle bugs me a little bit. I'm not going to deny it fits the mood. An album caught on the precipice of nightmares, it makes more sense that there isn't the same visceral, immediate, live edge, and that there's a film of reverb that covers most of this record. This is an album that's flitting between the conscious and subconscious with every edge sanded away. But at that point, it didn't quite hit the climax point for me as much as I wanted it to. Now, granted, Some of that might be Chelsea Wolfe's vocals, or more specifically the vocal production. She's always used distortion and reverb to great effect on earlier releases to intensify her presence, but this album often submerges her voice in a haze within her instrumentation, and while it can fit the tone and themes that she does this, it can make her lyrics a little bit hard to make out. A shame, because for the most part, her haunting delivery is incredibly good. Her ability to convey a hollow-eyed vulnerability and simultaneous creepiness still works in spades here, with her vocal cadence even reminding me a bit of early Sharon Den Adele of Within Temptation. One of my favorite metal singers. She sounds really good if you're a little bit more quiet. That said, the one moment that kind of threw me off with her voice is the odd lisps she seemed to have on Color of Blood. I'm not quite sure it was how she sung it or the pitch-shifted multi-tracking, but it didn't quite work for me and distracted from an otherwise pretty damn good song. And this takes us to lyrics and themes, where things get complicated with this album, because I like Chelsea Wolfe's writing, even as it can prove maddeningly vague at points to decipher, and this record all the more proof of it. It's frustrating, for as much as the imagery that she uses is very stark and paints very bloody, vivid pictures, like the carrion flowers in the opening track, but what those pictures actually mean can feel kind of murky in articulating something solid or impactful, often more focused on a mood than a direct message. And Abyss is no less inscrutable, carrying the sort of dream logic that seems to make more sense the less you think about the details. Take the song Iron Moon, reportedly inspired by the suicide of a Chinese factory worker who discovered and came to the realization of the dehumanization of being a cog in this vast machine. Chelsea Wolfe dreams about this person and tries to internalize the same crushing sense of smallness against an incomprehensible machine, and yet it's also hard not to see the song as an extended metaphor of Wolfe's powerlessness against her own mind, lacking the enlightenment to be able to transcend that Iron Moon crushing down on her. She described this album as being inspired by her experiences with sleep paralysis, where she can't wake up from dreams or nightmares, and when she does wake up, she can't move. That's terrifying to me. And yet that despair and confusion is definitely encapsulated on this record, as she wishes she could just succumb to the blissful ignorance of a simple death, easy dreamless sleep metaphor there, or the painkillers that she describes on Gray Days. And yet, throughout the course of this album, you get the impression that there's a subconscious reason, while she's still in this nightmare state, that she's got something that she needs to come to grips with before she really wakes up. And that's where I feel the back half of this album really frustrates me, because songs like Crazy Love and Survive, and especially Color of Blood, seem to imply it's a complicated relationship, one that Wolfe needs to just end and take that step into the abyss of yawning uncertainty. And unless she's referring to the relationship she has with her own unstable subconscious, possible, but I'm not quite sure the interpretation holds up all the way, I can't help but feel a little bit underwhelmed by that. For as crushing and huge as this album can sound, to find the root of it all just in another relationship gone wrong, it kind of undercuts the cosmic drama where it seems like Wolfe is fighting for her very soul, something more cosmic and powerful and big, even despite that, yes, all these songs are good tracks for what they're trying to do. They do kind of work. And hell, I like the thesis statement of the title track, how to truly come to terms with that horrifying abyss. One needs to face it and all the fear and pain that comes with it. One must endure it as though you know you must all along, and eventually you will find some vestige of peace, whether you like it or not. Hell, that even kind of works as a theme when you're breaking up a bad relationship on an abstract sense. But you know what? On some level, I almost wish this album had stayed more abstract and kept it to Wolfe's story alone, even though you could definitely argue that the underlying message isn't all that dissimilar to the one that was on Apocalypsis, and finding those moments of epiphany, whether they were good or ill. So yeah, in the end, I definitely like and respect Abyss by Chelsea Wolfe, but man, I wanted to like it more, because really it does exactly what it wants to do, and it does it really well across the board. And yet, I'm just left feeling a little cold on it. Maybe I prefer the more implied skeletal horror of her earlier work in comparison with the suffocating density here. Or maybe it's the fact that thematic execution doesn't quite click deeper, but for me this album is a very strong 7 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation, but again, a qualified one. Again, this is a tough listen if you're not as familiar with drone or doom metal, and even if you are, the mood can be kind of hard to take for a long period of time. This is a long record, but then again, we all have to stare into the abyss eventually, and this is just Chelsea Wolfe's turn to do so. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.